and a warm welcome to you all, and particularly a member of the union over there. All four of you.
Hang on,
I've
we've
got
got an
a nice echo here. Okay, ready. Right, start again, shall I? Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to you all, particularly from members of the union as well, to do a very important piece of work in a few minutes' time. We're ready to begin. Once I've asked for the live broadcast to start, which I am now, you'll pause for 10 seconds, please, okay? So that it kicks in. Okay? Happy? I get thumbs up, 2 thumbs up I've had today. That's good going. Right, agenda item 1, minutes of the last meeting, 15 December 2021. To ask the committee, the minutes can be formally be approved. Agreed? I have a hand. Good, thank you. Silent later on for you, Sarah, okay? Yep. Apologies for absence.
Okay, we've received apologies from Councillor Henry, Councillor Jackson and Councillor Smith, and we've got substitutions today for this meeting only. Councillor Guilfoyle for Councillor Henry and Councillor Barnfather for Councillor Jackson.
Okay. Thank you for those who are substituting. Greatly appreciated. Declarations of interest. Do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Do any members or officers present have any private interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? Okay. None. Agenda item 4, signing the Domestic Abuse Charter. A very, very important day or an afternoon for us all here today. Delighted that we've got members of GMB here today. As I said earlier on, I'll repeat that because I really are pleased you're here today. What I plan to do, therefore, is just to read a little bit about what we're signing up today. And then, if it's okay with you folks, we'll do the formal signing. And then we've got Ashley at the back to take a couple of photographs as well for the media. Is that all right with you? Thank you. As I said, I'm delighted that on 3rd November 2021, the Personnel Committee agreed the Council will commit to GMB's Domestic Abuse Charter, and our colleagues from GMB have joined us today to witness the signing of the Charter. Again, once more, thank you. This pledges accessible and confident support to any employees during domestic violence or abuse. On 25th November, members of the Administration and Corporate Leadership Team showed the support to the campaign against domestic abuse at the full council to mark White Ribbon Day. And as I'm sure you all remember, or most of us will remember, County Hall was lit up orange that evening. Yeah, you're nodding, thank you. As a mark of respect to survivors of domestic abuse and mark that start the United Nations 16-day campaign of activism against gender-based violence. However, we recognise domestic abuse and violence is perpetrated in some way every hour of every day, and we want to ensure that the signing of this charter is a further demonstration of the Council's ongoing commitment to supporting any member of the workforce experiencing domestic abuse or violence. Anyone can experience domestic abuse regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, or background. This is true for both the abuser and the abused. We want to create a working environment where our employees feel comfortable seeking support, knowing they will not be judged or stigmatized for having done so. We know domestic abuse has many facets and can be a single incident or a pattern of incidents often controlling coercive, threatening, degrading, and violent behavior, including sexual violence, perpetrated in the majority of cases by a partner or an ex-partner. However, the definition of domestic abuse can cover abuse between family members, such as teenager to parent or carer. We also recognise the damaging impact of such abuse, causing psychological, emotional, physical harm, as well as creating potential financial hardship. The Charter calls on employers to support employees experiencing domestic abuse by ensuring that they will not be disadvantaged at work and that they will be supported with confidential access to services and information. The Charter also requires the trained people to be able to support colleagues experiencing domestic abuse appropriately and confidentially. The statistics are really shocking. That 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men in the UK have endured domestic abuse in their lifetime. 2 women each week and 1 man each month are killed in England and Wales by a current or former partner. An estimated 2.4 million people experiencing domestic abuse last year in England and Wales. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the problem with lockdown requirements, such as working from home and limited opportunities to leave home, creating additional tensions and barriers to survivors fleeing their abusive situations. We as a council care deeply about its employees and value the contributions they make, serving the people of Nottinghamshire, and recognise that many of them have gone above and beyond the reasonably expected during the pandemic. Signing the Charter demonstrates our support to colleagues facing this type of abuse or violence, and must widely how we seek to support all our workforce. We already have an existing policy in place to support employees experiencing domestic violence, abuse. However, there's always more we can do, and signing the Charter provides an opportunity to publish a tangible commitment to providing improved support to any colleague facing these most difficult of circumstances. Having a clear policy and package of readily accessible and confidential support will assist our employees to manage their personal situations and make informed decisions around the options available to them. I'd now, it is a great pleasure to invite colleagues from the GMB to speak about the importance of the Charter and why it is so important to have one of the largest employers in the county to make this commitment. Adana, I think you're going to speak. Thank you, Adana. Okay, yeah. In the centre? You're there. Thank you, Adana.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. As the regional organiser with responsibility for Nottinghamshire County Council, I'm delighted to be here today to represent the GMB in the signing of this domestic abuse charter, along with my colleagues from the Regional Equality team. Councillor Wheeler has already highlighted that anyone can experience domestic abuse, and he has given us the shocking statistics. However, overwhelmingly, it is women who will be subjected to this violence, regardless of class, race, wealth, social group, sexuality, disability, where they work, or the job that they do. For many years, the GMB and other recognised trade unions have worked in partnership with Notts County Council and forged working relationships based on trust and understanding, and use the existing policies confidentially to support our members suffering domestic abuse. We have worked behind the scenes to keep our members safe whilst at work. As one of the largest employers in the county, you signing this charter shows your commitment to keeping your employees safe, and where you lead, we hope others will follow. The workplace may be the only place those suffering domestic abuse feel safe, and it's an important opportunity for them to get the support financially and socially away from their abuser. So, on behalf of the GMB, I thank the Personnel Committee for agreeing to sign the Charter. I thank the HR team and the Chief Executive's team for their commitment to this issue, both in the past and going forward. And I would encourage anyone who works for Notts County Council who is affected by domestic abuse and may be feeling isolated, afraid, alone, to please access the Charter and seek in confidence the information and support that is on offer for everyone. Thank you.
give them one.
You're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or if you prefer, take your exit. The choice is entirely yours. Okay, thank you. And thank you once more for your words. Greatly appreciated. Agenda item 5. If I could just begin to introduce a report, please, on the gender pay gap update, and to formally move the recommendations on page 10. Jonathan,
I'll be
do you want to
second,
second
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Jill, if you wouldn't mind, please
It's me,
present the
thank
report. Thank you, Jill.
Members of this committee will recognise that this is an annual update report. We are required to publish annually information about the Council's gender pay gap on the public website under the Equality Act 2010 Gender Pay Gap Information Regulations 2016.
Sorry, Jill.
The first time we were required to publish this information, a report was brought to committee in March 2018 and has subsequently been brought every year. The government relaxed the requirement to publish gender pay gap information last January due to the pandemic, but this council, because the work is ongoing, did publish updated information as we've sought to do every year. It's important to recognise the difference between the gender pay gap and equal pay. They're not the same thing. There is a very specific calculation on how you present your gender pay gap information. Equal pay is around work of equal value undertaken by men and women for equal pay. And apologies, members, you will see that I thought so much of the table in paragraph 4 and paragraph 11, which is the same table, so apologies for that. But that highlights the steady progress we've made since first required to report on this. And I think I've said previously that any organisation that demonstrates immediate and rapid progress must have done something wrong, because they'd have no people working for them and they'd have to be recruiting from scratch. So slow, steady, incremental progress is actually a good place for this council to be. So that steady improvement for the mean, which is the average pay gap, is at almost 4%, and the median, which is the midpoint, is at 8.6%. There are also a number of additional factors that create the gender pay gap for this organisation. We are a predominantly female organisation with over 70% of our workforce being female. There are still significant numbers of those female employees who work part-time in lower paid roles. We offer, and this is an important aspect in terms of attraction of any candidate increasingly, flexible working options, hybrid working options, so that people are able to balance their work and life commitments. The pandemic has also had an impact on turnover, and indeed we've mentioned in earlier committees the challenges we face in particular areas regarding recruitment and retention. So it is incumbent upon us to make ourselves the most attractive, to stand out from other employers, which is why we continue to use the phrase, and will do in other reports today, as aspiring and continuing to be an employer of choice. The work continues in the action plan. The information that we publish is that at Appendix 1 to this report. And because there are a number of newer members to this committee, this action plan includes completed actions as well as those that continue to be in train. This action plan, and later in committee we'll be talking about the people strategy, is one of the cornerstones as a number of other action plans to build on the delivery of the people strategy. So, and it will be listed there. So I'm going to pause there for any questions, because I think it's one of those topics that unless you're in it, it's quite a dry subject. We have to publish the information. We're making reasonable progress in delivering on the action plan, but there are external factors like the pandemic that are having an influence on how far we can go at the moment to achieve all the actions in the action plan. That doesn't mean to say we're going to stop. That means that we've just got to work harder at some of them.
And I'm sure we will. Thank you, Jill. Over to you, folks. Anyone wish to ask Jill any further questions or comment? Jonathan?
I think it's just to reinforce the great work that Jill and the team are doing on this report in terms of trying to make sure that everyone across the council knows, all our employees, that their gender isn't a barrier to position. But the fact is, this report, as Jill said, is that we're legally obliged to publish it, and it's a statement of fact. It's not anything else in terms of trying to distort any figures. And so, as long as we keep going down the route of which we are doing, which is that the anyone can apply for any role and be given the equal opportunities in any interview. But just to reinforce on point 7 about the challenge in recruitment, I see it in the private sector where I work, where you used to get 20, 30 people for a job. You should only get 1 or 2, and a lot of times they are applications made because they're told to from the job centre. You can tell they're not in a qualified position. And I'm aware of 2 high-profile roles in the public sector, 6-figure salaries, where not a single applicant for 1 job, or chief executive of an authority, and for another authority where only 2 applicants applied. And again, years ago, I'm sure anyone know there'll be many candidates. So it's a challenge across the board, but we're doing what we need to do. So I mean, just to pass on the thanks to Jill and the team and everyone that's doing the great work to keep putting out there the message to that anyone is welcome to join the authority, no matter your gender or any background. We'll keep going that way, and hopefully we'll see changes going forwards in terms of different people want to come work for the authority. Thank you.
As Jill has said, we had made very good progress. Just to illustrate the point, Jill has published the chart twice, so that we don't lose sight of it. No, I'm only teasing, Jill. That's very important. You did, and as Jill has just said, we're not stopping. We'll work harder if that's possible, the way we were, to drive down that, narrow that gap, and we want people to work for us. We are a fabulous employer to work for. And we welcome Di, who's just joined us recently, and I'm sure you'll agree with us already, Di. Of course you will. No, in all seriousness, that's what we want. We want the best people working for us, and we want people to stay with them. That's the drive and determination that Jill and the rest of the team are striving for. Thank you, Jill. Anyone else? That kisses back to you, Jill, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendations are that members approve the publication of the required gender pay gap information on the Council's public website, and agree to the identified ongoing actions, and to add any new actions, and to receive a further annual update of their impact towards closing the gender pay gap next January. Well,
yeah, well, quite.
An update on the gender pay gap.
Yes, we know what you're saying.
Yes.
Right, is everyone happy with that? Any objection? Yep, all in support. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Okay. I guess we move on to agenda item 6. I formally introduce the report and the recommendations on page 23. And do I have a seconder?
I have a second, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Back to you, Jill. Hope the voice stands up.
Me too. Thank you, Chair. This is a really important document. This is the people strategy, which we're seeking approval on this, and approval to develop a range of annual action plans to support delivery of workforce aspects of the Nottinghamshire plan that was approved at full council end of November. So the council's people strategy is to provide a high-level framework to enable the council to have the right approaches, plans and activities in place to ensure it's got the right people with the right skills and values, working collaboratively with partners, communities and organisations across the county to deliver the ambitious 10-year vision as set out in the Nottinghamshire Plan. In a hope that members feel that some of this is repetitive because it's building a narrative about what we're trying to achieve from a workforce perspective to deliver on the ambitions that are set out in that plan. And we know that the focus is on improving health and well-being in all our communities, growing our economy and improving living standards, reducing the county's impact on the environment and helping everyone access the best of Nottinghamshire. And it's really important to recognise that the people strategy, which is about our directly employed workforce and our contingent workforce, many of those people are also citizens of the county and therefore have a bearing and a stake in the council plan as residents. So our approach over the next 4 years is set out in paragraph 3, and the people strategy and the activities and action plans will be developed to deliver this. There is a context to this people strategy. Previously, there was a people strategy approved at Personnel Committee that ran from 2019 to 2021. And as I've mentioned already, then the pandemic intervened and it was thought appropriate to have a workforce resilience and recovery strategy to bridge where we were in the previous people strategy to the time where the council plan had been approved. And it's really important that any large organisation has a strategy and a plan in place, particularly, as Councillor Jonathan Wheeler was just saying, given the challenges we have in terms of recruitment and retention across the board in areas where we previously have never had such difficulties. So the idea of how we treat the people who come to work for us is really important. But even before that, we want to set out the kind of council we are and how we do business, both with each other and with our citizens. And that's why the Nottinghamshire Plan, the people strategy, and a whole range of action plans that sit beneath that are really important. And what we've got to get better at, which would be my criticism of where we've been previously, and my responsibility is, we write plans, we write action plans, and we beaver away at them, but we don't tell people what we're doing, and they don't necessarily recognise how things join together. And that's really important, because what we want is every employee to see where their place is in the Nottinghamshire Plan and how they contribute to its delivery. So the people strategy is one of the vehicles that will enable us to do this. It's a key component for organisational success, and it's underpinned by a set of very simple principles that the people we're looking to recruit and retain are those able to model the behaviours and attributes which are framed in these core principles. It's reflected in the new Nottinghamshire Way programme of activity, which will ensure the council and our people work in respectful, collegiate, empowering and collaborative ways which reflect our core values. And all these values and the attributes have been developed across all the departments of the County Council, because you'll not necessarily be unsurprised to know that every department had their own set of values, their own, and when we put them all together, thankfully they weren't wildly different. They mirrored each other. The language was a little bit different in some places, but at the heart of it, the values were the same. So moving to paragraph 14, about how we're going to implement the strategy. And of course, the strategy is there at Appendix 1 with the introduction by the chair of this committee. And I think that's another really important thing, that the committee is directly involved in the approval of many of the action plans and strategies that we've already got in place and that we're seeking to build on through the approval of this strategy. We talked in December about the new Leadership Development Programme. We want to roll out the Nottinghamshire Way to develop organisational culture and ways of working to deliver the vision set out in the Nottinghamshire Plan. In November, we approved the Employment Opportunities and Skills Development Strategy, and this committee approved additional capacity to enable us to deliver on that core priority of skills development. We have an overarching Equalities Action Plan that we continue to add to. We're developing and will bring at some point a version of the Workforce Resource Plan about what it is that we can actively do to bring people into the organisation at the level we need with the skills that we need. We've spoken previously about an employee engagement strategy, and we're also developing an employee recognition and reward strategy. And Councillor Gordon Wheeler referred to my colleague here. So Di Brown has recently joined us. In fact, Monday of this week was Di's first day. And Di's going to be focusing on workforce and organisational development within the wider HR team. And one of the first things that she'll be looking at is employee wellbeing and recognition, employee recognition. So things that are at the very heart of the employment contract, and one of the ways that people will feel valued by us as an organisation. I'm going to pause there before going on to the recommendation, just to ask if there's any questions directly related to the strategy or the covering report. And then I'll say a little bit more about the key themes within the report, but I've done a lot of talking already, so I thought I'd pause.
Sheila, yes, please, go for it.
Can I be pessimist here? I've just looked, improving health and well-being in all our communities. Are you going to be able to get to them all? Because a lot of people are really gone into themselves, I'll say. They don't want to talk to anybody. They'll order the stuff online. And other one is growing our economy and improving living standards. Is that a big ask?
It is for the people strategy, but those are the aspirations in the council, the Nottinghamshire Plan, which has been approved. And isn't it right that we're aspirational? You know, rather than say, well, we'll just settle for things being a little bit better. So I think what the people strategy is seeking to do is through our workforce, and our biggest advocates across our communities is our workforce, because in many respects they're the people going into people's homes, they're the people delivering services. And if they're telling their communities that Nottinghamshire is a good county council is a good place to work, they treat people well, they treat people fairly, that will translate into what our citizens' view is. And it sounds a bit idealistic, but it's one of those things that will permeate, because we've got 7,500 people work here. And if every one of those are advocates for the county council as a good place to be, then they've all got their little circles of friends, their families. Yeah. Yes, and there are ways we can try to reach them. There are different ways, because people may not be meeting face to face, but there's social media, there's different ways of reaching. We can only do so much with our workforce, and then there's a wider aspiration about how we engage with our communities.
It's just that in my area there were a man living on his own, I'll say. Never wouldn't let his relatives into his house, and his house were absolutely black mould all the way through. He had no central heating, and he wouldn't speak to anybody until he collapsed. And they had to get an ambulance, and they had to have everybody out to make sure his house were really cleared out, I'll say, and new boilers put in and everything replaced, really. You know, it's them sort of people I worry about, because they don't want any intervention, do they? So they said, no, I'll meet you at pub, or I'll meet you. One of them sort.
And I suppose my response to that is that people have choice, and if people have got capacity to make that decision to live in that way, then that is absolutely what it means to live in an independent society, that you have that choice. might not be the choice we would make for ourselves or our families. But if that person has got the capacity to make that decision, we've got to accept that, I think. If they were an employee, we try and reach them harder.
Yeah. I know Glyn and Callum want to come just before the dudes very briefly. At the last meeting, we actually beefed up our comms team. If you remember, we approved that almost unanimously. No, it's all right, Sheila. We did, and that's right. It isn't only about getting out messages from the ruling administration. It's not about that. It's about reaching everyone we can, using all the tools available to us, and it's very important to have that ability to do that, Sheila. So I'm glad we got the almost unanimous support last time to be able to do just that. And secondly, Di, you've had 3 days here. Come on, what's wrong with you? No, joking aside, I would like to work closely with Di as newly appointed to this post. I gave him a card the other day, Di, so please, without, well, obviously through Jill, we want to establish that connection, the connectivity, to work together where we can, to do all of the things that's just been spoken about. Thank you. Sorry, Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. Long time since I've been on personnel, fleeting visit, but welcome the people strategy. It's a lot of what Jill said. I sort of made a note on. You know, it's important to be forward thinking, plan for the future, and for the council to be ambitious, and an organisation, as is in the word of the parent, that people are happy to work for. That's absolutely imperative, because there's nothing worse than employees not being happy, because you're not going to get the results out there for the public. And I hope to think that most of our employees are happy to work for us, but we can always do better and do more. Hence why, the people strategy. And I think when I read this, it was more of this is a management tool, as opposed to be something that I could read. If I was looking at it, if I was an employee looking at this, I always look at what's in it for me, if you know what I mean. And I looked at more of this is more of a management tool for the managers, explaining, top level stuff. And one of the things was obviously, and you mentioned it, I know that there's been other things, because I've seen them as they've gone through council, and one of them was the Workforce Resilience and Recovery Strategy Action Plan. So, and also there was the former employee communication and engagement strategy. Is that now all superseded by this new strategic plan, or are they still in? Because clearly, there's, as you say, there's a lot of plans out there that this sort of fits into. And what's key for me as a member is that it's actually, having the good strategic direction, but then what makes that drive is the action plans and the monitoring of those action plans. And and what I want to know is, when will all the action plans come? Will they be put together so that we've got the strategy and the action plans together? And I think those action plans will probably be more meaningful as well to the staff that we employ, because they will show real outcomes. And then there are things that I remember that we've done in the past that where that fits. And one of them that's always been really important to me, not in one sense, and it's the TUC's Dying to Work, the charter, which I know we signed some years back, where that fits in. Things like that, the values that we've got that underpin a lot of this. So where does that fit in? And also, stuff like the living wage. And we've just been talking about equal pay and everything else, and the action plan behind that to make sure it all fits into one. So, except we've got this strategic document here, what I want to see is the other bit, because that to me is more meaningful. And then also about how we will, as members, and not just members, because it affects all members and all officers, not just how this committee will monitor that, but the impact it has on other service areas, because that's the important fact, that you can do something and actually it can have a different effect in a different service area because of the way that they work and the individuals that with those needs and special qualifications and everything else that have maybe different to another one. and you can make a sort of an overarching plan and whatever else, but actually it can affect the other one negatively. So for me, it's about how we pull all them together, how we monitor that. When will that be? When will we see that?
I'll have a stab at answering most of that.
It's a lot there.
Forgive me if I miss any points. So you're absolutely right. There are a whole raft of action plans that sit beneath those, some of which are listed here. And I don't think we've thought about bringing them all together at one point, because some of the areas that they cover are vast, and it would take a huge amount of time to scrutinise and bring to account on every action. So things like the Equalities Action Plan has been as an item to this. The Employee Health and Wellbeing Action Plan comes, and we monitor and discuss progress against the various identified actions. I think the point I was trying to make in my presentation was, we do that here. I'm not sure the workforce know that we do that here. And one of the things we've got to do better is to publicise exactly where we are against the identified actions, because different pockets of the workforce know it. They don't all know it at the same time. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about, on the intranet, there is somewhere for the Nottinghamshire plan. We'll obviously put the people strategy in that area. And I think there's something about linking to all the range of action plans, because the health and safety action plan's in there as well. We've got so many action plans about such a vast range of different things. We need to make sure that we don't start dropping the balls and remember what it is we're trying to achieve. And you mentioned the Dying to Work Charter, which was interesting because the very colleagues who were in the room previous to Ty was instrumental in that. We absolutely do still sign up to the Dying to Work Charter, and it's implicit in how we treat people with terminal illnesses. And indeed, one of the early things that Ty's talking about is setting up a grief cafe, a virtual cafe, so that colleagues who faced a lot of bereavement, either in their professional lives or in their personal lives, will have a space where they can share those experiences with other colleagues so they can be properly supported. So, and all the things that we do, so things like the Disability Confident Leader accreditation, which has also got an action plan. We've agreed in this committee we don't sign up to things if they're not going to be translated into meaningful action that actually make this a better place for people to come and work and stay and work. And that would be my ongoing commitment in everything that we do in respect of the action plans. So I'm not sure I've answered all the points that you've raised, but as a general answer to some of the points that you've raised, I hope that you find that reassuring.
Yeah, I mean, one point is I would say, well, does every employee have access to the intranet? That you know, because I was going to say, well, I do realise we could put them on the intranet and then people could access. The problem is, does everybody have access to the intranet, and what do we do about the individuals there? The other one is, what about if we're also looking about encouraging people to work for the county council? What about the internet that we have, our website, that's a public website? Again, about putting some of the things on the public website. Because again, some employees then who probably don't have access for whatever reason onto the internet may still be able to get some of those documents, you know, on the our web.
So one of the things we're trying to do in developing the Nottinghamshire Way is to ensure that every employee has the opportunity to engage, not just those who have access to email or the internet. Now, that's a thorny problem because, you know, it about a whole raft of things about how those people who don't have email addresses are contacted rather than just using hard copy mail. But that doesn't mean to say we're not going to continue working at it and working with those services where the staff don't have access to that information. I think we've also got to recognise there are different kinds of psychological contract and why people come to work. And some of our services, if you ask the people, they wouldn't say they work for Nottinghamshire County Council. They'd say I work in such and such primary school's kitchen, because that's where they see their focus. So we're not blind to that issue, but it's something we know we've got to work harder at.
The last one, because obviously schools are a clear indication where people, as you say, they work directly for NCC, but they see their local school as actually their main employer, because that's where they get a newsletter, because that's where the wages come from as such in that sense. Also thinking about, what about organisations that are arm's length to us, that we would hope have the same ethos and thread running through their organisation. So VIA and ARC, for instance, how do they sort of match in with our strategy?
I think the strategy mentions how we seek to work with partners, and therefore we will share our strategies and we'll share those values with them. So that's important. Work as a way of working, moving forward. You also mentioned in your previous point about how do we get the future workforce engaged, and yes, some of our commitments and strategies are available on the public website. But one of the things that when we were talking about the skills development and employment opportunity strategy was a much more strategic work experience programme where we would have more direct contact with all the schools, secondary schools primarily, which sit outside of the local authority control now because many of them are academies, but that we would seek to maintain contact with anybody who came forward to for work experience, and almost like generate a newsletter for schools so that they were kept informed about employment opportunities, different traineeships for people of every ability. So yes, we've got apprenticeships available. Yes, we've got our graduate trainee scheme. We've got lots of other opportunities and learning opportunities for people. And the start of that might be the approach for work experience. So we have got a range of activity to try and improve that for the future workforce. But again, we still know that the majority of people come for jobs with the County Council through our public website. And again, we're hoping and trying to develop our workforce to be the advocates. So John might say to a mate of his, well, yeah, it's not a bad place to come and work, and if that's your skill set, why don't you apply, because you think you'll enjoy it. And that's what happens with a lot of jobs. They go by word to colleagues, they're shared by word of mouth.
Thank you. If I can just bring Margin possibly to kind of answer some of what you've just raised as well.
Borrowing the chair's microphone. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things you said, Councillor Guilford. I draw your attention to the underpinning principles in the strategy, where one of the key foundations of the approach we've taken here is building on those things already in place, whether it be strategies, whether it be action plans, whether it be approaches, whether it be charters, because that was a really important principle, because we've got a lot of really good things ongoing. And we wanted to build on those, and it was really important to managers and to staff. We didn't lose sight of the really positive things we've got underway, and we wanted to build on that. So that's a fundamental principle for the strategy. And that speaks also to the bit about the action plans, because what the approach we're advocating here is to have an annual action plan which picks out the key priorities for each year, because there's so much, as you quite rightly identify. What we're going to focus, I don't think we could do it all of the time. So we're going to pick out what the key priorities are to deliver this strategy, year 1, year 2, year 3, and then monitor that as we go through, set targets and monitor that. And we think that will enable us to be more agile and more fleet of foot and respond more flexibly. And the final point I just wanted to make is the bit about how do we engage people? So we launch our Nottinghamshire Way programme next week with our staff, which will be led by the leader, by the corporate leadership team, by the chief executive, talking to our staff, talking to them about what is it like to work here, what does it feel like, and how would you like it to be? And that's where we view that as an ongoing conversation, and we're going to start that dialogue next week. But another really important part of that is management and leadership, because you can't do all of that from the centre. You need day to day, what might matter to me most, particularly in some of the groups that Jill's talked about, is what it's like for me. How does my manager treat me? How do my colleagues treat me? How do we behave towards each other? It's really important that we do that. It's all of the time. It's not just when somebody's looking. So we've got a number of things underway, and hopefully we'll be able to report back on positive progress in the not too distant future, focusing on those priorities.
Also asked about investing in our employees. Nottinghamshire Way programme, which went through this committee last month, December, is a substantial commitment by this council to develop our employees so they have the right skills, the right attributes, the right tools going forward, and involving members as well. So we don't get away with it. We should be involved in their development as well. And so if you get a chance to, Glyn, if you haven't seen it already, do have a look at the Development Nottinghamshire Way programme, which was passed by this committee last month. We'll happily get it to you if you have difficulty getting it, Glyn. If you want to, just let us know. Thank you. Sorry to keep you waiting all this time, Callum.
I think a lot has been said since I first put my hand up. But yeah, I do think this is a very welcome plan. So one of the big things I've picked up in it is the increased digitalisation, as well as a more modern way of empowering managers and workers, show the employees, trusting employees that they know what they're doing when it comes to their job. I think in terms of the public sector and private sector, the public sector does have a bad rap when it comes to in the modern age. So there is a reputation that authorities are a lot slower at picking things up when it comes to technology. And I think the pandemic has really put a reset on that, where all businesses have been putting the same foot. And now as we emerge out of the pandemic, we've got a real chance here to really showcase what Nottingham County Council can do and really move forward and show people who are looking for jobs that actually, Nottingham County Council are one of the better councils to work for. And, I really fancy going to work for them. That'll also help with retention. And as you move into the other aspects of it, so for example, empowering, as well as having welfare, I do think that with this plan, we can really set Nottinghamshire up to succeed in the next decade to come. So that's me.
Very well said, Callum. Thank you for that. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's just worth saying that obviously this is an overall strategy, so that's why there isn't, war and peace in detail. It's strategy, the aims where we want to be, and then, as Jill's already said, and you see on page 36, there's a list of just some of the action plans to implement that strategy. The strategy is our aims and where we want to be, and also to detail that it's a living document, so it's going to be reviewed at the very least every year if we go to the cabinet system by the cabinet member to make sure there, but also by scrutiny. And if it's committed still every year to look into it, and of course officers and the council will be looking at it on a continual basis. So if the strategy needs updating at any time, it will be. It won't just be a case of sit on the shelf for 4 years and we go, oh, hang on, we didn't achieve any of that, as I already said. So I think it's really good. And as Jill mentioned, the good thing is when you go through it, you think, oh, hang on, we're doing that. We've seen this come to committee the other two, which also then shows what we just said about the living document, the fact that this isn't just something new we just concocted out of thin air. There was a strategy before, but over the last 2 to 3 years especially, really been looking into how we can take things forwards with developing our people. And I think it does send a clear message to our people who work for us, people who want to work for us, that we do take it seriously what they think, and that their welfare is a key priority. Because that's already been said. A happy employee is a productive employee. Let's just absolutely put it that way. And we need to make sure that people want to work for us, not only because a lot of them are customer facing, so we need to make sure customers being our resident facing, and at the same time, I say you don't have the high rates of absence or turnover, which costs this authority a lot of money and our taxpayers a lot of money. So I really welcome the strategy and look forward to seeing how it progresses. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill, I know you wanted to come back, but I think we've already dipped into a lot of possibly what you were going to say. So is there anything specific you want to raise, or are you happy for us to move on? Your call, Jill.
I'm happy to move on unless there's any further specific questions.
Okay. Any other questions, or we're happy to go to the vote if you're all satisfied with that? Are you happy with that, Jill? We got to vote. Okay, great. Okay. In that case, we will go to the vote. You have the recommendation in front of you. Jonathan alluded to those earlier on. All those in favour then, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's unanimous. Agenda item 7. If I could just introduce a report on fire safety. And the recommendations are on page 40, which I'd like to move. And John, seconder.
I was second, Chairman.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jill gets a break. John, it's yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The report today focuses around the moves to review, maintain, and I think the word I should have put in there is improve, which has fallen out of this review, fire safety arrangements. And the reason why I've put maintain is obviously with the lower occupancy in our county buildings, we're very conscious that we still have to have safe evacuation procedures. Over time, ways of working have changed very much from fixed office-based through COVID with little occupancy and moving forward into a new hybrid approach. The added flexibility brings new challenges. We very much aspire to have the right person with the right training in the right place at the right time in an emergency. And whilst we can do that with a regimented fixed system, it's much more difficult with the fluidity of hybrid working or with lesser people, as we've experienced during COVID. The report itself focuses on the larger county office estate, and that really is where the fuller impact's been seen over the period of COVID, and where we foresee the flexibility will bring the biggest challenges. On the rest of the county estate, the office estate and building estate, if we look at day centres and children's centres and the likes, we have a far more predictable staffing who will adopt those specific roles as part of the job, and we've seen little impact. They've been maintaining those procedures throughout COVID, and we would envisage that will continue into the future. But that's not to say that the good practice we learn in the new training and some of the new models that we're implementing can't be put into place within those facilities. So the staffing attendance, as I've said, is more predictable at these locations, and I think the challenges we're dealing with in the county office estate is the fluidity and not knowing who will be in at a specific time with the right training, or indeed the numbers there to either affect the evacuation or be evacuated. Whilst this has been brought to the light during COVID-19, it's certainly not the full cause, and I think, well, I certainly know that action plans I've brought to this committee over the last couple of years, we've addressed or started to address and make inroads into how we're going to improve emergency procedures. It's been on our radar, to say it has been highlighted during this last 2 years. We're conscious that there is a legal position. We've got the regulatory reform fire safety order. We have the Health and Safety at Work Act, which requires, at the end of the day, a risk assessment and indeed a fire risk assessment. And our fire risk assessments are very much based around having the provision of fire wardens in place to effect evacuation. And that's ultimately what we're looking for, is how do we safely evacuate all people from a building during an emergency. We had an incident at Lawnview, which was very minor in itself, which was basically an overheating microwave. But because of the circumstances where the accident happened, it was drawn to the attention of the health and safety team, and as normal, we did a full investigation and review. Some points were raised by the people who participated in the evacuation, and it drew out a number of concerns. And I think really the concerns were people weren't necessarily trained in those roles at the time. We did evacuate in a timely manner, but it could have been better. And I think it was a situation where we looked to the gaps that were revealed by this incident. The fire service didn't play any part in this, but what we did after this incident, we went to our own internal fire team at ARC to seek some advice. So building on that incident, we pulled together a team which was quite broad in its membership of property, facilities management, ourselves in health and safety, and corporate communications. And we started to look at the various facets of how we evacuate and how we did this during the more regimented systems of the past. ARC did an independent report and looked at the fire zones within the buildings, of which there were numerous. I think we had something like 300 individual fire zones which would require sweeping across the county office estate. And the initial approach was to look how we reduce that down with the availability on site and how that could easily be swept and fed back through a fire marshal who would coordinate and report the building clear. But it quickly became apparent that, however we looked at this, without definite guaranteed bodies on site being trained, it was incredibly difficult to guarantee we would have a successful evacuation procedure. So we thought we'll have to look externally at what other people are doing and also what other approaches were available. To gain some background information on paragraph 10, we decided to carry out a number of evacuations, forced evacuations across the larger buildings, the larger county buildings, and in fact this, which was scheduled, actually had a contract to set the alarm off, so it was slightly more realistic because it was not pre-planned. And we drew from the list in paragraph 10 some detail which used to formulate the plan going forwards. I think the time to evacuate the building, there was a stagnant position where people hadn't been subject to a drill for some time and they weren't necessarily heeding the urgency of the alarm. But that was quite easily rectified. But I think the more difficult areas were how do you account for people on signing in and sounding out forms. When it became beyond 20 people, we found either people hadn't either signed in or had forgotten to sign out, so that wasn't that robust. So we realised we couldn't rely solely on a signing in and out system for the larger estate. The more we looked at this, it wasn't just fire wardens, but it was actually the fire marshal as well. And could we guarantee the fire marshal? And that's really the pivotal role. So the fire wardens will sweep designated areas and report to a fire marshal who will have looked at the fire panel and identified where the problem is, what the zone's been triggered, what area we presume the fire to be in. And there's also the issue of call challenge, and do we report that back to the fire service or not, and how do we cancel that with not having any fixed staff within the building, guaranteed fixed staff within the building. So all those points taken on board, again, we met and we pulled together an action plan looking at all the facets of evacuation and going beyond then just evacuation as to what information was available, what the training was, what signage, what facilities we have on site for people to access information, and what indeed the fire service could access when they arrive. So this is where I think some of the improvements come in, because we set out to look at how we evacuated, but actually now we're looking at a complete fire evacuation system. So the learning points on point 11, or paragraph 11, were really the key things that came out of the forced evacuation practices. We then settled on an approach which centred around the strapline of listen, look and leave. And this is really majoring on people's own responsibility to take some action for themselves and their colleagues, and a behavioural safety approach. So we think if we instill some very basic knowledge, and at the end of the day, we're not asking for anything massively technical to be done other than looking around an area to make sure nobody's left within it, and if somebody is left within it, report it back to the fire marshal or another colleague to gain help and assistance, and ultimately report back to the fire service if it's a real fire. So based on that approach, the role, or the new role, will be that everybody will adopt or have the capability of adopting the fire warden position. This meant that we had to simplify the fire zones, and during the practices we also recognised there was a huge inconsistency of things like vests, where fire marshal and warden vests were kept, where documentation and sweep zone maps were kept. So we've reviewed with ARC the actual zone plans. There's been a floor walk of every floor in every zone of every large county office. It's been remapped by ARC. And as from the end of this week, those facilities will start to appear. The vests have changed from yellow to orange. Reason being, when we look around some of the offices, we just saw a sea of yellow jackets because of the nature of our work. So we're saying look for a yellow vest in amongst yellow coats, which wasn't helpful. And indeed, the fire information, in some it was on a coat hook, and others it was nearer the exit door, and others it was on a locker. So we put in a consistent fire point piece of signage and a fire point within every building, within every zone. Also, there will be fire boxes by the fire panel, which will provide additional information for anybody undertaking the fire marshal role, but also enable a handover or a better handover to the fire service if they arrive. And there'll be things in like their charts with the isolation points for gas, electric and water, the fire, the floor plans of the building, copies of the fire risk assessment. So that said, we have worked with comms. There is now a draft package ready to roll. We're looking to dovetail into the existing mandatory training package the new material for fire wardens and fire marshals. This will be hopefully rolled out as a new learning package from April, and it'll be mandatory, so everybody goes back through the mandatory training cycle and signs off that they've seen both the basic fire awareness and now the new fire warden training package. The evacuation of visitors, now that will still continue to be the responsibility of the officers that they're meeting, but again, we're looking within the training to give better point of meeting information, and certainly also asking what has formerly been a reception task of are there any issues around deaf alerters being required, and looking at any issues around PEEPs specific to the visitor and how we actually facilitate their evacuation as well. So that is a part that really remains unchanged, but it's just enhancing the role. Paragraph 21, really, and I'm not going to go through that word for word, but that really summarises some of the key changes that we're putting in place. But the bottom bullet point, the enhanced frequency of fire evacuation practices. Once we've put in place the training, once we've put in place the new facilities, they will be ramped up. We'll encourage everybody present to participate. We're looking realistically at something in the region of a monthly practice to start with, and then once that's embedded, we'll probably drop those back off. But we certainly don't want to go back to the 6-monthly position we were at, because I think under new flexible working, there's a chance that you may not be in the building now when the fire evacuation takes place, the practice takes place. It'll be very much potluck. So if we ramp those up, there's a fair chance that you will at some point attend the office and participate in an evacuation. Personal evacuation plans, again, looking in detail at this, we've looked at what we have presently. This hasn't changed a great deal during COVID-19. What we found is some of the facilities to assist those with disabilities have the training is required. There's been a skills fade. People have moved on. So when we talk about evacuation chairs, evacuation mats, and how to use the deaf alerters. So there's certainly a training need there, which we've identified and we'll move forward with. That will very much be on a person to person and person to need basis initially, although the evacuation mats, which are now standard practice across the buildings, will be covered during the new building inductions. We've sought advice from the Business Disability Forum. I'm pleased to say they have responded robustly with a 16-page document as of yesterday afternoon, and we're working on that and looking at the best elements of that and what we can truly implement quickly as quick wins, and where we've got to go back to seek further advice. So that's been a benefit, and I think that can only lead to an improvement as well. Moving on to arrangements for elected members, again, we would encourage you all to participate in the evacuation practices, which no doubt you already do. The actual induction programme does cover fire evacuation, and indeed I believe the new induction this year was in a virtual basis because of the constraints of COVID, but that, when we can do, will be a proper walk around the building covering the evacuation routes and the evacuation point. And for the chamber, we will always, whenever we carry out specific risk assessments, consider fire safety, but generally officers would lead an evacuation. So if there are new members or visitors within the chamber, they would be guided out by officers with experience. So really, the other options considered, we couldn't remain as we were because we knew we had gaps and we had an ineffective system. Formal rotoring on would be problematic and doesn't sit well alongside the hybrid working approach. And first on site, the first person adopting the role on site really was very much down to individuals' goodwill, and we didn't feel it was as robust as giving everybody the ability to act as a fire warden, enhance their awareness, give them some responsibility for their and their colleagues' personal safety. So that's the role that we're now promoting and the direction we're travelling in. A mention of the fire marshal, we're also going the step beyond where the first fire warden on scene at the evacuation point, if the fire marshal isn't there, we give ourselves some inbuilt contingency that first fire marshal or fire warden will adopt the fire marshal role as well, and that's within the new training. So it just gives us that little bit more self-sufficiency, and we don't have a row of fire wardens stood there wondering what to do next. So the reasons really for recommendation are that new systems identified, they offer the best workable solution. We have, as I say, consulted with other authorities, private sector organisations, and nobody has really come up with anything better and more robust. I last week have spoke at some reasonable lengths with an HSE inspector and shared the information, and they're looking at what we're promoting with interest. I think they thought it was quite an interesting and novel approach, and didn't see any barriers to it, but also will report back if I have any further feedback. And I think the behavioural safety approach fits well alongside the ISO 45000 and management system that we already have. And this is a balance which realistically, I think the word there, realistically, balances our legal duty against what we can achieve on site. I think I'll pause at that point to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Thank you. John.
Chairman, thank you very much. I quite like this model, to be honest. It definitely reminds me of a military model. The first person on site takes the lead, no matter what rank you are, who you are, and you make sure everybody's safe. So I do like that model. Has this, and the reason why I've thought of this was because of what I've just said, is have we dovetailed this into any acts of terrorism or any advice from the police? Because obviously, with what's happened, sadly, to the MP and other MPs, I do have concerns on that.
Yes, if I may just address that question, Councillor Lee. We do look at obviously counter-terrorism, the angle, and evacuations for bomb threats and other incidents. The new Protect pending legislation will give additional duties to us as a public body, and there will be additional procedures that sit alongside the fire procedures, but they will be based very similar to training people to take action. The difference being obviously the assembly point for that will be at a further distance or an evacuation point, but we have noted that.
Thank you, John. I think it's also very important now, if you agree, John, when people coming in and out of the building, particularly at the moment, where we've got a fluid workforce, members coming in, members going out, to fill that register in by the front desk. And when you walk out, even if you're then coming back, please sign in, you're going out, please sign in, you're coming back in, please sign in, you're going out again, or else we won't actually know who's in the building at any given time. So thank you for that, John. If that's it, then we'll just go to the recommendations, which Jonathan's already read out on page 40.
Just to
Oh,
suggest,
sorry.
just to
Sorry,
suggest,
Glenn.
I think it's using obviously the people that we've got that are in the building to the best, you know, is brilliant. Just thinking about obviously members, and it is difficult now because, you know, before we used to have most members came in most days, you saw them. That doesn't happen these days like everybody else, you know, they're working from home or whatever, which is, you know, good and part of it, the hybrid working. But just as an example, perhaps one council day, I know it won't go down very well with business managers, but that may be a good day when most members are in and quite a lot of officers who to actually have a training exercise. I know it's a long walk when you do the bomb one, but that's all right.
Certainly.
I was going to suggest we did it on your motion.
You will note that I don't bring motions. I have a view about that.
Chris looks very, very comfortable with that proposition. Okay, thank you, then. Let's move to the recommendation, which Jonathan's already read out. All those in favour, then? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, Sarah. Item 8, Nottinghamshire County Council workforce availability, sickness, etc., etc. It says on your heading over here. I'll introduce the report and formally move the recommendations which are on page 48.
I'll be second, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. You've had your rest, Jill. You're back now.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide elected members with an update on the current position in terms of workforce availability, sickness absence for Q3, which ended on the 31st of December, and to seek approval for the ongoing actions contained in the Employee Health and Wellbeing Action Plan and for any new actions identified as part of the Workforce Resilience and Recovery work stream. I think the last time we brought a report on this specific item was September, and what we were trying to demonstrate was the level of workforce availability. With the upsurge of COVID and the fresh restrictions, having moved to weekly reporting about workforce availability, we returned to daily reporting to the corporate leadership team, so they had real-time information on the number of people currently self-isolating, absent with COVID-related sickness absence, other sickness absence, or indeed any of the other authorised reasons for not being in work. And that had dipped significantly. So throughout the pandemic, we've been 85% plus. And then with Omicron, there was a dip, and we did go right down to the high 70s. I'm pleased to report today's figure is back to 86.4%. So there are fewer people now self-isolating and absent with COVID across the whole workforce. But that has proved a very useful exercise in informing members of the corporate leadership team on the number of people available. And of course, we've seen dips around Christmas and public holidays where people are more inclined to take annual leave as well. But that's allowed us to plan effectively. And as we were talking in terms of the people strategy, it's really important for a large organisation to be able to plan its resources effectively. Well-being, physical and mental well-being, has been at the heart of much of what this committee has considered over a period of years. And we continue to work both within the HR team and through the Workforce Resilience and Recovery Group, which is chaired by Marge, to identify new ways of asking people how they are, what they're feeling, because obviously that's changed. And we've done workforce surveys. We did one in May 2020, we did one in May 2021, and we'll be doing another one in May 2022. So we'll have 3 years of data to be able to let us compare and contrast about where people are and how they're feeling. And again, in joining up this report with that around the people strategy, employee health and well-being is one of the key themes of the people strategy. So we recognise not just it's important to look after the people we have working for us because it's the right thing to do, but because it signals how we want to treat people, both our current workforce and our future workforce. So it joins together with our recruitment and retention aspirations as well. In reporting the figures, and we had seen in the earlier days of the pandemic an improvement in non-COVID related sickness or sickness absence if you took COVID out. And some of that was attributed to the ability to work flexibly. So the person who is able to work at home might, on the day that previously, if they'd had to get up, get dressed, get in the car, get into work, they might have rung in sick. We were finding that they were taking their time, logging on, but they were working. They weren't necessarily recording it as sickness absence. And we continue to look at that. But I think in other places we've talked about the workforce, certainly frontline services, being fatigued. So they've been at the pandemic for nearly 2 years. And although they remain deeply committed to delivering the very best services, it is somewhat inevitable that people will be tired and exhausted. So we continue to encourage people to take their annual leave, to look after themselves as best they can. But we have seen an upturn in Q3 in sickness absence. Now, there is something about Q3 and Q4. We always see more sickness absence because of the very nature of winter and more coughs, more colds, more throat infections, and people taking longer potentially to recover from that. So it's not an altogether unusual trend, but it is noticeable, and that's set out in paragraph 5 of the report. So sickness absence is at 8.89 days, which is up by 0.77 days if you exclude COVID-related sickness absence, and that translates to 10.38 days, which is up 9.3 if you include COVID. Now, it was noticeable we had more of our workforce off towards the end of Q3 with COVID-related absence than at any other time during the pandemic. So I think it's important not to become overly concerned about that. And as I said earlier, I'm pleased to report that we are seeing a return to the workforce availability figures that we had experienced earlier on in the pandemic. But we do continue to manage absence. So this balance, isn't there, between employee health and well-being and managing absences effectively. And we've said previously in this committee, it's not that we don't believe the genuine nature of people's sickness absence. And Councillor Guilfoyle mentioned the Dying to Work Charter. So we obviously want to treat people with long-term health conditions, indeed terminal health conditions, fairly and reasonably and kindly. But there's got to be a point where somebody's absence can no longer be sustained within a service. And that's why in paragraph 7, we outlined that in the quarter there was 6 dismissals for ill health capability, and there was 25 people met the criteria for ill health retirement, which means they're permanently incapacitated to do the job they're employed to do. We have an ongoing issue with the use of other as an absence reason, and we've spoken about this before, and I know it's something that Councillor Wheeler is particularly concerned about. So what we've done to try and address this is that the HR business partners, we've taken adult social, one of the largest departments where other is a significant factor, second highest reason for absence, and we're looking at every instance where a manager has put other as the reason for somebody being off. And we're getting underneath that, because it's only when we properly understand why people are using that we can say, well, perhaps we don't have enough absence types. Perhaps the manager's not entering the absence, they're getting their business support to do it. but we need to understand that because we've sent out the email saying, please don't use it. We've tried that on a number of occasions and there's been a slight improvement and then it drops back. So what we want to do is have a proper understanding and we'll see what the work we're doing in adults tells us and then we'll replicate that across all the other departments. So hopefully when we come in April, we'll have something more positive to report in terms of the use of other. As I said, in paragraph 9, we refer to the particular interest that has been expressed by members around the mental health and well-being of our workforce. I've referenced the work that we've started to do with Bipolar Lift, which is a local charity. John has referenced in his report the very helpful advice we've had from the Business Disability Forum. I have to say that we're getting very positive feedback from the people who are accessing that as a means of not just supporting people with a recognised disability that would give them some kind of legal protection, but also in that management of the longer term health conditions and some of the softer advice and information. So we're seeking to build on that. We've only taken out membership for a year. We'll see if it's providing proper value for money, and we'll be reviewing our membership of that as we do with all our affiliations, probably early in the summer. I thought it'd be helpful because what we've found really beneficial through the work of the Workforce Resilience and Recovery Group is that a manager in Children's and Families Department has led a work stream on employee health and well-being to give it a different perspective. And one of the things that's been generated by that, and you'll find it at Appendix F to this report, is the Workforce Wellbeing newsletter. Now, that's got a range of different tips, guides, people's experiences, where you can have a nice walk to at lunchtime to give you a break from your screen in this particular way that we're working at the moment. That comes out monthly. It's a really, really positive piece of work between the colleagues in that work stream and other HR colleagues. And I just thought it might be of interest to you to see the kind of information that we're sharing, that the people who access it have fed back really positively. But again, in this place, to something Councillor Guilfoyle said earlier about how we get those messages across to the people who don't have access to email it. But what they can do is they can sign up and they can receive it on their personal devices. So there is a mechanism. We've just got to make sure that that's been properly conveyed to all our employees so that they can access it. We continue to add new things to the Employee Health and Wellbeing Action Plan. So next, whenever the 3rd of February is Time to Talk Day. So again, there'll be specific materials published on the intranet that people can access, and there will be the mental health first aiders will be available so that people know where they can be signposted to support and information. For those people who may still be in work, that they're not off sick with any authorised reason, but they might be feeling vulnerable, worried, anxious, and I think every time we find there's a major announcement about changes to how people are working, so the return to work message, the sort of revert to plan A from plan B, there's a little spike in anxiety, both for the people who are desperate to come back and the people who are anxious about coming back. So we continue to work with managers on an ongoing basis to ensure that they're having those supportive discussions, to ensure that people know what the service imperatives are, but also know where their personal preferences can be aligned with those. But we've said all along, what the service needs is what it will dictate and determine where people are operating from. So, as I say, the performance, if we're looking at absence, has dipped this Q3, but overall workforce availability over that period had dipped significantly slightly, but has recovered towards the end of the quarter, and that improvement is continuing into quarter 4.
Thank you, Jill. Open to you, folks. Chris, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When we produce these statistics, Jill, do we do any comparators with other public sector organisations, particularly, and indeed with the private sector, nationally published figures in terms of our absence rates for sickness? I'm thinking, you know, the combined fire authority figures, the police figures, the 7 district councils. I just wonder how we compare alongside those other bodies. Are we better or worse? Are there any learning lessons from any other organisation that we can look at? And I suppose finally, if a manager puts other down, surely we don't accept it. That's not a valid reason for absence. We just send that back as not a valid reason.
I'll answer that point first, Councillor Barnfather. So, it's an electronic system, so you've got to process it, report on it to go back to the manager. But there is a legitimate reason for absence because of the nature of absence types. So we've got generic absence types. I think there's 10 of them, but there are still. We think for some it's where people are experiencing more than one reason. So you might have broken your arm and your leg, but sorry, that's a poor example. You might have broken your arm and had surgery. So do you put a musculoskeletal or post-operative recovery? And for some managers, rather than making the decision, they're putting other. So we're doing the work, but we can't remove it as an absence type. There are system reasons why it wouldn't be helpful to do that, because we've explored that already. In terms of the...
I'm sorry, Shirley. So is that computer says no?
No, absolutely not. There are legitimate reasons why we want to keep other as an absence reason. I'm just trying desperately hard to think what the written reason for that was, but I can share that with you because we've explored it. We've explored it with the system owner, and there's a very legitimate reason why we need to keep it.
I think it's a perfectly valid question, Chris. I think we've asked the same question before in a different way, perhaps, but we've asked the question before. A lot of work's gone on the other category. You're quite right, Chris. We need to drill down. Some of it could be explained managers taking, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this. The easy way out is putting other, but from a perspective of the member of staff, we need to know what that problem is so we can offer that right level of support to that person. So it cuts both ways, Chris. But yeah, Jill will get that answer for you, because of course we will. Thanks, Chris. Lynn? Sorry, I cut across Jill when she was giving me the full answer to the question. I'm sorry.
So the other part of your question was in relation to comparative data benchmarking. Yes, we have done benchmarking. We've probably not done as much of it as we should have during the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we compared favourably, I have to say, with a range of public sector organisations. But I think that probably bears refreshing now. We used to use CIPFA data, but not enough large authorities contribute to CIPFA to make it meaningful. We do work with East Midland councils, and there is a NOTS HR network where we share absence data, which is the boroughs, districts and city and ourselves. And again, we compare favourably. The thing we've got to be really careful, because I'm 100% sure we accurately report all our absences. Different organisations have different metrics about how they measure absence.
Are you happy with that, Chris? I thought I'd check because I'm
sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy with the answer. I must say I'd be interested in the figure, having come from two. You know, I've been on the fire authority, I was on the police authority, I've been a police officer. I know how we produce that data as a manager. And we did look at comparators across the public sector. I'd just be interested in, you know, how we do that. And I appreciate at the moment with the pandemic still lingering that the figures are totally skewed in any case. But we do this breakdown within our own organisation. I'd be very. I'm a guest on your committee.
No, you're not.
Chair,
You make a very valid point.
but I'd
It's
be
up to
very
you.
interested, I suppose, in my other role, just to look at those figures, those comparators, how you produce that information, whether it's a confidential item or what, I don't know. But I think there is value in it personally.
Whether you're a guest or not, Chris, the points you make are very valid, need to be looked at, and we will look at. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Glenn, it was you had a hand up.
No, just support Chris on that. I mean, you know, we used to compare health and safety as well. You know, accident figures across the board with other authorities, some of a similar size. So you know, so it is to some extent comparable because in reality you can't totally compare the county council with a district in one sense because the number of employees and whatever else. So yeah, I think there is a way in which you know you should be able to share that information across the board. Just in relation to the other, you know, we all go on websites, don't we, and have to fill questionnaires in, and sometimes it'll say other, and then what it does, it takes you to another thing, and it'll say, please explain what you mean. So what you have to do is you have to put. It's like if you tick a box that says was the employee on the train? You know, I use the train one there. You know, they put up, you know, was the employee? Did you see the employee? And if you tick yes, it comes another box comes up, and it'll say, please tell us how you felt about the interaction. And so I think that other now that might annoy managers even more because they'll have to put a few more words in. But actually, there'll be some context to what the other is. So, as you explained, if it is that he's had an operation and he's broke, you know, she has broken her arm, they can put that in and you've got the data. So I'm sure our IT could put that other box that takes them to something for them to fill an explanation in.
It's not our IT system, we buy it, and changes and developments have a cost attached to them, but we can certainly explore it.
But there is ongoing work on that, Chris, on that, Glenn, as it says in the report as well. But you're quite right to raise the issue, as Chris is as well, of course. Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, as you always said, it's bugged me for 5 years. I'll be on the committee, and as you know, but I think what's also important is we need to understand the managers why they use it. Because if I remember, we either took it away or told everyone not to use it for a short period, and then all we saw was none assigned shot up because people were just moving from using that to another column. So actually, rather than moving the problem, you understand why they're using it and find it so we can get the correct data. Because as everyone said quite right, we need, until we know what the problems are, we can't deal with them. And I think that's what we've got to really get across, and we have been trying to with certain managers. I think if we had to pull data, if it's the same managers putting over all the time in department, it might be that half the department are doing absolutely right and half the department are using others. So we need to understand rather than cast everyone with the same net of doing it not wrong, but perhaps not doing it right on that sense. And I think then hopefully we can get to the bottom of it and be able to go forwards. But I think we also need to highlight, as I know Jill said, that over 70% of our employees didn't have a single absence day last year, and we do actually need to recognise that and to. And people who were able to come in were done, and I think the vast majority of absence will be genuine, and the ones that aren't not doing the correct process, like return to work interviews that we talked about before, and understanding why, I think will hopefully eradicate any absence that are not genuine, and we can then go forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one thing I'd like to say and pay tribute to those who contributed to Appendix F. And these are those are our employees and their own stories in Appendix F. I think it's an absolutely wonderful document, I really do. And I would definitely like to place on record a thanks to all those who took the time, trouble, effort to engage on that. It's very valuable. Thank you. Is there anything else anyone would like to raise? No? In that case, we have the recommendation that Jonathan says on page 48. We go to the vote now, please. All those in favour? Thank you. But we do appreciate there are some answers. We'll get back to you on those, okay? Thank you. Item 9 is a work programme, which you have in front of you. As you will see, we obviously only go as far as April, because by then we could well have a new cabinet system with us, but leaving that to one side, we've got a work program here for the 9th of March and 20th of April. The bit, as you will see, something new for us, the British Sign Language Charter update's been introduced there. I think I mentioned the last meeting, we had a virtual meeting with the British British Deaf Association, sorry, which went down extremely well. A lot of learning points for us. Briefly touched upon it yesterday at a virtual meeting. Sorry, earlier this week with Qualities Group at which you were at, Di. So there's work to be done on that. The work is being done with the report coming to us in April. Is anything you want to touch on that, Marge?
Yeah, I just want to propose one change to move the health and safety update from the March meeting to the April meeting to give us time to prepare for the results of an inspection that we're having in that intervening period. So with that change, proposed change.
Thank you. And the agenda will change to March because obviously the discussions are ongoing in the background all the time on these things. Okay, thank you. So we don't need to vote on that. We're happy with that. Thank you. Well, that concludes the business of the day, and thank you very much for everyone attending and those who are being online. And thank you particularly for those who substituted for this afternoon's meeting. It's greatly appreciated giving up your time and trouble to be here this afternoon. Thank you. Stop.